Welcome to 20th Century Geek. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, constant listeners. Okay, well, I know that Halloween has passed, but that does not mean that the spooks have left us. The season of darkness is upon us, so I wanted to continue with our spooky themes. Last month we talked about Ghost Watch, and we actually visited a haunted castle. This month, however, we're going to go further afield. We're going to go to America, and this month I'm going to focus on a very specific haunting, the haunting of the 20th century, really. We're going to talk about the Amityville Horror. This episode, I joined up with the presenters of another podcast, a fantastic podcast called Knock Once for Yes, to discuss the real events, or the alleged real events that took place in that house. In the next episode, I will then be looking at the media and entertainment value that the Amityville has provided, the first film, the film series, and how it started to change how haunted house films were created in the 70s, 80s and on. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to me and the presenters of Knock Once for Yes. Please enjoy, and I'll see you on the other side.
I just moved in my new house today. Moving was hard, but I got squared away. Bells started ringing and chain read aloud. Knew I'd moved in a haunted house. Still I made up my mind to stay. Nothing was gonna drive me away.
Okay, so I'm joined by the guys from Knock Once for Yes.
Hello, I'm Lil. Oh, sorry.
No, go for it. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Just jump in, introduce yourselves, and about your podcast. So, who are you, and what do you do?
I am Fitz, and I'm one half of Knock Once for Yes, the paranormal podcast.
And I'm Lil, and I'm the other half of Knock Once for Yes.
Excellent.
Basically, we both had sort of lots of, say, paranormal, I'm going to do bunny ears, not that you can see them, paranormal experiences. And we're really interested in the subject as a whole, and we love hearing other people's experiences. So our show is basically us sharing what we've been through, listening to other people's stories, and basically just we'd love to hear from everybody about their own weird and paranormal stories.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's been some great ones. I mean, I've been a subscribed listener, and
Excellent.
The stories that come out are fantastic. It's I think I sort of lean towards. I think Fitz, you said you're more the skeptic.
Basically my view is I believe that people have experienced what they say they've experienced. I'm just not necessarily going to agree with their interpretation of it. I've seen stuff that I cannot explain, but I won't jump in and go, that's the disembodied spirit of so and so. It's just like, that was weird, and I don't know what it was.
I think I come at it from a similar angle in that I will definitely be sceptical, and I don't believe that just because somebody's seen something, it's their great aunt Edna. However, I am the one that tends to want to believe so much more.
That's it, but that balance of sort of like having that view of not being the blind believer. It allows you to sort of, to find that nugget of truth in all of these situations that probably is actually stranger than just believing it's a ghost.
Yeah, sometimes.
No, and sometimes it's just a ridiculous coincidence, or, it's a coat on the back of a chair. But other times there is just no explanation that we can think of. Obviously, most of the stuff's either secondhand or you can't necessarily replicate it. But it's just, you think, even years later, having pondered over it, you just can't think of any explanation.
Yeah, and that's it. So I think it's so you can ponder it and go round it and round. But will we ever find the truth? One of the things I've been doing to sort of prepare myself for this a little bit. He's watching a lot of the ghost hunting shows.
Oh yeah.
and they vary from the skeptical, or they say they're skeptical, but within 5 minutes they're all jumping around and, oh
Screaming.
my God, I've heard this, I saw this. And it's sort of, I don't think I've made it through. I think I get like 2 or 3 episodes into each one, and I'm just like, oh.
Cringeworthy. Yeah. Some of them are very much cringeworthy. To be fair,
I went out with UK Haunted a few weeks ago on an investigation, and even being pretty sceptical, it is fairly easy to get caught up in the moment. We were listening to the Ghost Box. I'm not really a big sort of believer in it, but you'll sit there for half an hour, 45 minutes, and you'll get 2 or 3 things that seem to follow on what you're answering, and there's a little part of your brain that's going, oh, that makes sense. Talk back to it. It's talking to you.
Yes.
And you sort of look back on it later and you go, well, I was there for 45 minutes and most of it was either nothing or didn't really make sense. But it's just, you take the hits, don't you?
That's it, yeah. You've got to sort of take the good with the bad, or the strange with the normal, I suppose.
And it's much easier to be sceptical in your armchair at home with lights on.
Yes, I totally agree. I can sit here and in the light of day and say that I don't believe, but then even at home, with the lights off or sitting somewhere quiet, if you hear something, there's always going to be that second guess in your head that goes,
oh yes,
possibly. Yeah. So can you just wait 1 second?
Yeah.
Yep.
Come on. Go. Sorry about that. My 4-year-old just came downstairs to check. She said she's come down to check on me. That was very nice.
Oh, bless. I just had an image in my head of that TV, the reporter that was on a couple of months ago who was doing was it North Korea or something, and his kids ran into the room and then the wife ran in and pulled the kids out.
I'll tell you what, it happens. I get the chance to work from home at least once or twice a week, and we have Skype meetings there. And the amount of times she walks in and she's like, "What you doing?" You just like,
making money to feed you.
Trying. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today then is we are going to jump into what I would say is possibly one of the most well-known supernatural paranormal events ever.
I think that's fair to say. Yeah, it's certainly the event that brought the haunted house to the big cinema screen, I think.
Yes, it's a thing in pop culture that the word Amityville is sort of synonymous with haunted houses now, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
So let's start with we'll run through the events, and then we'll chime in about what we think of those, and then we'll talk about the haunting, if that's okay.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool.
So the one thing we do know is on November 13th, 1974, 23-year-old Ronald Butch DeFeo took a .35 caliber rifle and killed both his parents and his siblings in their beds. I think that's sort of alleged, but he then went to work the next day, carried on as normal, and then later that day ran into the local bar, got a group of his friends whilst he was to go back to the house, whilst he was stating that somebody else had killed his family.
Mm-hmm.
He was later arrested for this after the police had done a whole host of investigation. They linked it to the mob, they linked it to contract killing, they linked it to home invasions, there all kinds of things. The crux of it is, though, that on the 21st of November 1975, Butch DeFeo was convicted for the killings. Now, this in itself is where the paranormal stuff starts to allegedly be linked with the house. Before we get to the Lutzism, what do you guys think of the killings?
There are some very odd things that I wouldn't necessarily pin down immediately to be paranormal. But to start with, Ronald DeFeo did actually come out and say at one point that he was possessed by demons to do it. His story has changed wildly over the years since he's been incarcerated. He came out and said he was possessed by demons and he was under this demonic influence. And then later he retracted it and said, no, that was rubbish. He wasn't at all. It was just down to him. There was also some query over whether his sister was involved in the killings, which is very interesting. He was on drugs when he committed them, or supposedly committed the murders. And he, in one statement, he says that he saw this hooded figure with black gloved hands give him a gun through this sort of drug-induced haze. And a neighbour later said that they saw his sister leaving the house, presumably to possibly ditch a murder weapon, in a hooded coat, wearing black gloves. So there is a theory going on there that actually they were both in it together, and then later he killed his sister.
Yeah, because apparently they were very close.
A bit too close.
Yeah, yes. The suggestions do. Yeah, some of the innuendos in the documentaries weren't so subtle, I think.
No.
Yeah, these are claims of demonic possession and stuff seem to have come out of nowhere, but it's the thing of these claims were then supported by the fact he used the .35 caliber rifle, which is notoriously loud, but there were no reports of gunshots from neighbours or anybody in the vicinity.
No, but the odd thing is that the neighbours reported that they heard the dog barking that night. Now, how on earth would the sound of a dog barking wake you up? But the 6 rifle shots, was it 6, I think? Six rifle shots would not.
Yeah.
No, there was, because he shot his parents twice and everyone else once, didn't he?
So more than 6 shots.
So
and that didn't wake them up, but the dog did.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the one thing, the fact that there was no noise, and the other thing was that none of the rest of them got up, went, what on earth is that going on in the house? Not just the neighbours, but they were all shot in their beds.
Wounds.
And, you'd have thought if you heard gunshots in another room that you'd be jumping out of bed going, what on earth's going on?
Yeah, because they're all found in this similar position as well, face down
on their stomachs.
To the back or the back of the head. So it's, like you say,
the toxicologist said there was no drugs or anything either, because that was the only other thing that immediately springs to mind, is that they were drugged, which is why they didn't hear it and didn't move. But apparently that wasn't the case.
No.
I mean, the only thing I saw that sort of was a possibility that his two younger sisters had been killed elsewhere and then moved and placed in the bed. However, when I sort of tried to research that a bit more, it was just a claim. There was nothing to suggest.
Right, so there was nothing to back that up, really.
No, there was no blood splatter or gunshot in the rest of the house, just in the bedrooms. So.
And also, there was no silencer used, was there? Because they did find the murder weapon, and it didn't have a silencer on it.
No, it was just found down the street in a storm drain. And this is where I sort of, as I said before, like I flip flop on this. When I researched it, as to whether there's any supernatural events. Or anything.
No, I know it's not, because it's nothing to make you immediately think supernatural, despite DeFeo's claims of the sort of demonic influence. But then, when you get down to it, how on earth did a whole street not hear those shots?
No, we live in this country in relatively close proximity, and if someone bangs a door in the house next door, I'm pretty much going to hear it.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely.
Admittedly, it was a detached house, so you're not going to get the sort of common noises you'd get in sort of a terrace here, but a gunshot travels.
Oh,
yes. When the police did the forensics in the house, I looked at you can't obviously, I don't think you can see the actual reports and stuff, but there were all these claims, and I saw notes in different websites that were saying that when they did the forensics, they only looked at the bedrooms because there was no evidence of anything being disturbed in the rest of the house. So there was no broken furniture, there was no sign of struggle, there was nothing. The house just looked normal,
untouched. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't understand. It's hard to sort of nail it down as a truly normal event.
Definitely.
No, and I find that actually the most interesting part of this story.
Really?
Yeah, obviously you've got the Lutzes and their experiences, but I actually find the fact that they all stayed in their beds, that nobody heard the gunshots, that is the most intriguing part of the story for me.
I agree. I do. It's one of the things I keep going back to, because I mean, the other thing is, it was the sort of like, well, why did he do it? Whether it be demon possession or whatever. And
Well, I think there's a lot of evidence that was a very unhappy family.
Yes, and that's what I was going to say. It's when you dig into the family, his dad, it was also Ronald DeFeo, was a very violent, aggressive drunk.
Yeah.
Who beat pretty much everyone in the family.
And in front of the children's friends as well, according to some reports.
So, I watched a documentary. It was just focusing on the DeFeo shootings, and apparently they had taken Ronnie DeFeo to a psychotherapist around a year to 18 months before the shooting, and
had they?
And he had received treatment and was actually in therapy, but they had been warned that if they didn't do something to help him, he was going to snap.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Well, it wouldn't have helped with all the drugs either as well.
No, God, yeah.
Mixed mental illness and heroin and all sorts, and that's just a recipe for disaster.
The thing that I find most interesting about the family situation with the DeFeos is, just to jump slightly ahead very briefly, you can see quite clear parallels between the DeFeo family dynamic and then the Lutzes, I think, later.
Yeah. It's a question I sort of have, actually, because there is that thing, and the part of the world that this takes place in, both families come from sort of like, they came from rougher neighbourhoods and moved into the Amityville area. The DeFeos came from Brooklyn, and the Lutzes came from another part of Long Island. I can't remember what it's called now, but the rougher area of of Long Island. But they both come from a slightly, a working man type of background where that was probably accepted. Strong man at the head of the house and stuff. So it is interesting dynamic. But did that play in then? Was something left in the house that affected the Lutzes?
Well, it strikes such a parallel to my mind that you'd have this family with this abusive dynamic, and then just to follow it straight up after this horrific murder with another family with this similar dysfunction and abusive dynamic.
Well, let's get to that then, really. So, as we said, the killings happened on November 13th, 1974. Ronnie DeFeo was convicted on November the 21st, 1975. And literally weeks later, on December 18th, 1975, the Lutz family move into the Amityville house. It's George Lutz, his wife Kathy Lutz, and they have 3 children, Danny, Chris and Melissa, who is referred to as Missy. And George is the stepfather to all 3 children. He's a surveyor, working as a contractor. And they got this house for £80,000, which to me still sounds quite expensive, but
it does to me actually. But for the size of it,
but apparently it was a steal, and so they moved in very, very quickly. They bought the house and moved in within literally in a matter of weeks.
And they bought all the furniture as well, didn't they? That was left behind.
Yeah, literally, pretty much everything. It's bizarre.
Which just sounds that is incredibly creepy to me. Just to move into this house that's still fully furnished with the dead family's furniture.
Yeah, I mean, even from a pragmatic approach, if you're a bit like, I'm not too bothered, it was former crime scene, I'm not superstitious or anything. Even from a pragmatic...
No, but I think they kept the beds that they were murdered in.
You did. That's the bit that freaks me out.
I mean, why? Why would you do that? I can understand everything else. I mean, I guess the kitchen sideboard's probably not, been involved much in the murder, but the beds that they were shot in, why?
Yeah. So they move in on the 18th of December and they flee 28 days later. So what's your thoughts on those 28 days that the Lutzes spend in the house?
Oh, goodness, where to begin? It's very difficult to actually manage to pin down a first-hand account from the time of what happened in that house, according to the family. And part of the problem, and really why such convoluted stories have blown up around this event, is because I don't think they ever really got the chance to tell their story firsthand before the media got hold of it. Because they talked to William Webber, who was wanting to enter into this book deal with him, but he basically leaked their story without the family's permission and without any consultation to an associate of his, who then had it published in Good Housekeeping. So that's the first account there is. But the family didn't know it was happening. So there really is no initial first-hand original account of what happened, which bothers me.
I agree with that. I mean, the other thing is that it's that thing of, like, say, not is there like an initial draft or an account. There's never been like a proper, like, analytical first-hand account. It goes like you say, it goes from it happening to becoming entertainment.
Exactly. With nothing in between from the family, and. Well, I think the reason that they asked Jay Anson to do the book was to try and set the record straight. According to them, they wanted their opportunity to actually put their story out there and put to rest some of these, wilder claims that were happening. But to do the book, they actually made recordings of their experiences on tape and handed them over to Jay Anson, sort of put their entire trust in him to tell their story. And by all accounts, he didn't do that. They didn't then consult with him, though, over the book, which I find really strange.
Well, this is it. I've now read the book, which was sort of one of the reasons I wanted to do all this. And when I researched the book, I was a bit like, well, it feels like a novel. It reads like a novel.
It does. I did it backwards. I read the book before I saw any of the films.
Yeah. Well, either way, it's entertainment, like I say, because when you read the novel, and I'm going to call it a novel, he recounts things that they clearly would not have known about.
Yeah.
Like, there's whole conversations between the priest and his bishops. There's whole conversations between other people, and it's like, well, he clearly took what they said and thought, I need to beef this up a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the sons, Chris, has come out and said later, he wasn't allowed to read the book, obviously, at the time. He was only a child. He didn't read it until he was an adult. And he practically threw the book across the room when he did get around to reading it, because to his mind, that was supposed to be their story. And when he actually read it, he was horrified.
Yeah.
And he took it to his mother and showed it to his mother and said, why did you let them do this? This is horrendous. This didn't happen. This isn't a true representation of our story.
Yeah, I think, in almost every interview I've seen with any of them, they've all said that everything that was ever publicised was exaggerated. And when you actually listen to what they're saying, it's certainly a lot more toned down than, well, the book and the films. And because it's all, like you say, it's entertainment, it's got to have that shock value. Otherwise, it's just, it would be an interesting story down the pub, but it wouldn't sell multinationally.
I do agree. I think that's where the sort of this caught a public imagination. I mean, it really did. I mean, again, when you see the interviews, they were on chat shows for months, and you can, like you say, you can see in these interviews that whenever they're pressed to give an answer, they've almost been given an answer they have to repeat, parrot style in some cases, of yes, this is what happened. This is, yes, we are selling the book. Yes, this is what happened. It never feels, I don't want to say genuine, because it's clearly something happened, but but I still feel like they've been prodded to add and boost because there's more.
Well,
someone behind it poking them to say more.
Yeah, and I wonder whether there is some pride in that as well. Because like I said before, they started off on the back foot. They thought that William Webber, who was Daniel Defoe's defence attorney, was going to help them with this book deal. And they realised very quickly that he was just out for the dollars. And they realised very quickly that he was trying to cut in Ronald DeFeo for 5% of the profits of the book, including their story, and decided that there was no way they were going to fund a murderer for killing his family, and pulled out. But this, of course, put William Webber's back up. And I think him leaking the story to the press was a retaliation in a way. But by that time, it was too late. The story's out there and it's exaggerated and it's blowing up and the public are going crazy over it. And then what do you do as a man, as an ex-Marine, as a proud ex-Marine, when the media are saying to you, oh my goodness, all these terrible, terrifying, frightening things happened and they force you to flee your house. And then how do you turn around and say, well, actually, it wasn't that scary, but yeah, we were scared enough to run away, but it was nowhere near as terrifying as the media are painting it. You can't really do that, can you? There's a level of pride in there that would stop you.
Yeah, I've never thought of it like that, but it's a really good point. Like, psychologically, it's that thing of sort of, if the bar has been set at a certain level, and people are like, well, you managed to live with that, that's incredible. And you're like, well, no, not really.
Not quite.
Yeah. You say it dips that interest. I mean, the one thing that has come up a few times, we've obviously already in our conversation, is money. And one of the go-tos for whenever anything like these, any event, not just Amityville, but whenever any of these events go into the public eye, money comes up. Oh, they've done it just to sell their story and da-da-da-da. And
their claim originally was that the reason they came out with the story in the first place was because DeFeo was saying at the time that he was under demonic influence. And they say that they felt they couldn't not come forwards because although what he did was terrible and unforgivable, they thought he might genuinely need help because they felt they'd experienced true evil in that house. And they felt that like it was their responsibility almost to come forward and bring their story and say, you know what, he might not be crazy. He may be under some sort of evil influence. And that was their drive to actually come forward.
Yeah, I think it's like you say, it's they were doing it. If that's to be believed, they were doing it for the right reasons. And that's when you start to wonder, like, how much of what they actually recounted happened. And if you do tone the book back a bit, there are certain things that you can feel are true, that come up again and again, like the fact that, like, you know, George Lutz could never get warm. He always felt cold in the house and was obsessed with the fire. You know, he apparently suffered dark moods and started to feel really sick and got really ill.
I have to say though that although that does come up in a lot of haunting stories, it could also be signs of PTSD or anxiety disorder. He speaks a lot about how he becomes obsessed with checking the boathouse is locked and spends half the night running backwards and forwards to the house and to the boathouse, checking things. You know, the fact that he could never get warm and the mood swings. It could quite equally, I think, be a mental health problem.
I'm really glad you said that because that's exactly what I was going to ask. Because
and I'm not making a sweeping statement. I actually have anxiety myself, so these are things that I have experienced.
But like you said, though, he is a former Marine. He's clearly had some experience. I don't know what his military career was like, but it was also under a lot of stress from work.
You've got to imagine,
financially. So could it be that like these things all, you know, built up to actually form a like I say, a form of mental illness that for that period actually not just affected him but started to affect the entire family?
Definitely, but having said that, a lot of the things that they have, all of the family have consistently brought up as first-hand accounts are things like being woken up in the middle of the night by these tremendous noises, doors slamming, hearing footsteps, Kathy being touched on the hand. I'm trying to think of what some of the other ones are.
That's something I like to focus on, actually, because the thing is that, say, there's all the noises, and the things that I could easily discount and almost threw away was the flies seemed to be something that was very entertainment, very, you could forget all that.
Yeah.
But the thing of Kathy, the presence that she felt in the kitchen area, she said she felt someone touched her on her arm. She felt she could smell perfume, and she felt like almost like it's in the book and in the film. It's described as almost like a supportive presence. Doesn't feel so aggressive.
No, she seemed to experience the whole thing in a very different way, because she said later that she felt more at peace in the house. She was aware that these things were going on and they were disturbing, but she actually didn't want to leave. And that was the main way it affected her for the majority of the time, was that she stopped wanting to go out. She stopped being able to find reasons to go out of the house, almost like she was more at peace there somehow.
Yeah. So it's that thing of like, we said about the dysfunctional family that the DeFeos were. You have the aggressive Daddy DeFeo, and then you had the beaten and I assume rather submissive mother of the family. If this is literally, just over 13 months later, is this those spirits or that echo coming forwards?
I tend to draw more parallels with something almost like the Enfield case. Because I don't know why, but for some reason Amityville is not generally seen as like a classic poltergeist haunting. When I say poltergeist haunting, that's quite widely believed to be caused by a person rather than a ghost haunting a house. It tends to, like with the Enfield haunting, it was centred around two young girls. It's sort of believed to be almost created by a person that is experiencing trauma or really high emotions, and they're making this paranormal phenomena happen. And I kind of wonder whether there's an element of that to it, because you've got a family that's quite dysfunctional, they're not getting on. George perhaps is suffering from some mental trauma as well. And that's a lot of energy to be putting out there, especially coming in straight into an environment where there's been that intense energy and this horrible murder and psychosis, really, of Ronald DeFeo. And then you've got another family coming in straight on top of that and almost creating a perfect storm.
Well, that's it. And it's that energy, isn't it? So you've had that, everything that's gone before has now been piled on top of. And it's funny that you mentioned Enfield. Like I say, everyone focused on Enfield as being almost like a typical poltergeist haunting, almost like a textbook, as it were. Two young girls on the verge of puberty. It's sort of like, then it all starts. It's focused in on a spirit that lived in the house. This, though, like I say, the reason I think people don't associate this with almost poltergeist activity is for two reasons, really. Firstly, I would say it's the fact it's built on the entertainment aspect of people. It's so sensationalized that it's almost more than a poltergeist activity.
Yeah.
The second one is, I think, something that people have become more aware of in recent years is what I've become to know as the Warren effect.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. The Warren effect. Those Warrens.
Yeah. So they get involved after the fact, and as with everything, there are no ghosts, there are no spirits. This is plain and simple a demon from hell.
Of course it is.
And I think Lorraine Warren actually described it as the most evil house she'd ever visited.
I think all the houses she visited were the most evil house she visited.
It's funny you say that, because I then looked into the house she visited that was the forming of the basis for The Conjuring, and she did say exactly the same thing.
I am not surprised. It's really funny because I was watching two interviews back to back. I was watching one with George recounting his the events on the last night before they fled the house. And then straight after, I watched one with Ed Warren recounting his version of events on the last night in the house. And George described the levitation of Kathy, and he said she raised slightly off the bed about 3 to 4 inches. But by the time it got to Ed Warren telling it, George and Kathy were floating 2 feet from the ceiling.
Oh, he is. He's. I always think of the Warrens as like the typical like Hollywood producers. Like they've got to big up a story, so by the time you tell them, it's 10 times bigger, and it's almost like everything's going to. It's the Michael Bay effect. Like everything's going to explode. So, I do think they're the reason that this gets has given less credence as the years have gone on, is because of the sort of the bombastic nature of the claims that they made.
Well, it's almost like everyone involved is trying to one-up each other. You know, each one wants a bit of the limelight. So it's like, no, it wasn't 3 inches, it was 4 feet. And then, it wasn't 4 feet, it was 10 feet. And each time you sort of have a new version of the story. It's like the fishing story down the pub, isn't it? It starts off, you got a £2 tench, and then all of a sudden, by the time, your other half comes to drag you out the pub, it was a monster and it nearly swamped the boat.
Yeah. That's it. I think they are. I think that they're a real... one of the documentaries I watched was it was called My Amityville Horror, and did you watch it?
Yeah.
We did. He's an oddball, isn't he?
With Danny DeFeo, yeah. Yeah.
It was quite upsetting to watch in a way. I mean, that he's very disturbed by events.
Yeah, he's had an interesting life because if he's to be believed, he left home when he was like 14. He lived in the desert for a while, and there's other bits and pieces that were very...
Yeah, we found that really odd. There were certain things like that where he'd make a statement like, I went to live in the desert, and the interviewer was like, okay, well, tell us a bit about how did you say, I just lived in the desert.
Yeah.
There was no... Like, if you said to somebody, okay, so you say you lived in the desert, how did you do that? They might say, well, I backpacked around and I had a tent, or I lived in an RV, or,
Stayed with some friends.
Yeah, stayed with friends, but it was just, no, I lived in the desert. You're not getting any more out of me for that. And that seemed really strange.
It was really bizarre. I mean, actually, he does actually say at one point, he does say, I stayed with friends. And they say, so there's other people in the desert? He's like, oh, yeah. And it's just like, oh, well, I'll accept your word for it then. That's fine. We'll move on from that.
Yeah,
it's a very
defensive.
Yeah, it was very uncomfortable to watch.
It was.
But the part that I found the most unusual, because he makes claims that he was possessed, that he levitated, and that there were things that he saw that happened. He actually states that these things happened on those 28 days. But then when he goes to see Lorraine Warren, he basically treats her like a loony.
I know, that was so bizarre. I couldn't work out what was going on.
No,
I really couldn't understand what was happening, and I couldn't tell whether he was aiming that at her or just what.
He's all over the place. So I couldn't take him as a sort of a reliable source.
No, do you know what the thing that I find really strange is that both sons in all the interviews they've done, they quite obviously really hate or dislike at least their stepfather. Never got on with him. They both left home early because they couldn't get on with him. They've pretty much said that he was violent towards them. So you can understand that loathing. But then why? It would be so easy for them to refute Georgie's claims. It would be the perfect retaliation for them to get back at him for what he put them through in their childhoods, to turn around as adults and go, no, he made it all up. None of it happened. And I find that really, really peculiar.
Well,
it does lend credence to it.
Well, yeah, exactly. You're right. It lends credence to it.
And that's the thing that you say. I totally. That was almost when I knew nothing about the documentary before I'd watched it, and when I watched it, that was my expectation. That he was going to sit there and say, no, it's all rubbish, and George Lutz, was a horrible man, and this happened and that happened, and he did it for these reasons and stuff. So when he actually started recounting tales of possession and levitation and ghosts, I was a little bit gobsmacked. That I was like, oh, okay, so and the thing that adds further credence for me is the fact that, like, they are not in a good position, and they're clearly not trying to milk this for money.
No.
You know, you don't see one of them turn up as executive producer on Amity Asylum or Amity
No.
Dollhouse, one of the
And in
terrible
fact, Chris has sort of tried to hijack the latest Amityville movies. In fact, he's turned up on the set and caused havoc. And in the way he describes it, you can completely understand why. You know, they've just taken this story that's supposed to represent the poor, you know, his childhood, and just run away with it. So you can, you know, it makes sense when he's explaining why he's trying to hijack it, and he's been approached by people to on these films to be a consultant, and he's told them where to go, and you can understand that, but it doesn't. If he was gaining anything from the Amityville story, surely he wouldn't do that.
No, I mean, if anything, it seems to have broken this family.
Yeah, again, every time they've spoken about it, they've said, you know, it's nowhere near as exciting as the film makes out. And if you're, you know, brought in to sort of help produce a film, and you say, actually, you don't need that explosion, that never happened, and you know, you don't need this, didn't happen. And it's like, well, what actually did happen? It's like, well, you know, you could tell it in 10 minutes, and it's not that scary, really. Yeah. It just, if you wanted to make money out of it, you'd be like, yeah, you know, and then this happened, and then it took the roof off and pulled the head off my sister, and you know, you dramatise it for effect, wouldn't you? But to sort of say, no, the window didn't smash, it just opened and closed, and you know, it doesn't have the feel to me that they're trying to make it interesting for the public. They're just like, this is what I remember. Yeah,
and so they're not refuting the claims. They're not saying it never happened, but they're not sort of cashing in on it either, which is, you know, really does to me say something happened.
Yeah, it wouldn't take much for, you know, Chris Lutz, This Is My Story, to release his own book and cash in on that, but they don't appear to have done it. They'll do interviews and things, but there's no sort of, they haven't released their own books to say, you know, this is the real story.
You watch They Will now.
Yeah. Well,
don't prove me wrong.
Even the books are like the first one, Jay Anson's first book, is a telling of their events, that 28 days. But there are 7 other books.
I know.
There's literally the first 3 are treated like a trilogy, and the part 2 and 3 are just complete like fiction.
Yeah. Well, that's assuming the first one wasn't complete fiction.
Good point. Very true. But like you said, this whole event is overtaken by entertainment and a desire to
shock.
Yeah. But I wonder if that's because of when it happened.
Well, there was nothing, and that's what annoys me sometimes when people say, oh, they were just doing it to get a movie deal. How could they have possibly? There was nothing like this out there at that time. Nothing. And I think the movie only came about because the book had become such a bestseller. But it wasn't, you know, it wasn't known. It's not like today where haunted house movies are, you know, dime a dozen. They didn't exist. Not in that format.
No, I really do, because they didn't make anything from the film. They made very little, because, as you say, the film isn't a film of their story. The film is an adaptation of the novel, the book. So yeah, Jay Anson may have made a bit of cash, but they didn't see a penny. So again, that leads credence to the idea of like, well, what were they doing this for then?
And if they were doing it deliberately for money, they went a strange way about it and a very risky way.
Yeah.
You know, there was by far no guarantees they were going to make anything out of that. You know, it may have just been sort of like, if they were doing it for the money, that a magazine would have said, well, we'll print it for 50 quid. Like, you know, the stories you get in the newspapers that are sort of public interest stories. You know, it might go, ooh, Woman's Own will publish it for 50 quid, but that's all you're going to get. You know, it's not like they were guaranteed the stardom for that.
No, I don't think the sensational press really existed at that period. It wasn't, you know, there wasn't like a 24-hour news cycle that had to be filled. So stories like this probably weren't getting the press then.
But I mean, George, I think in a later interview said basically that himself. You know, somebody put the question to him, were you doing it for the money? You know, what would you say to somebody that would accuse you that you're doing it for the money? And he said, if we were doing it for the money, we would have done a better job of it.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I think he's right. You know, the actual very base claims that they all consistently, all the family members consistently come out with, like hearing the footsteps, waking up at 3 a.m. in the morning, the doors slamming, the being touched on the hand. They're all really, really classic things that we have experienced ourselves, having lived in a haunted house, and we hear them from our listeners in their stories all the time. They're really, really common things. And if you were going to sensationalise this story, that's not what you'd come up with.
No. And that's it. I think that's it. When you get to the sort of like the nub of this, and you start scraping away the crap, really, there is clearly something here that
I think so.
You know that is unexplainable. One thing I will throw in is when the Warrens did visit the house with their team. It was sometime after. I think it was close. It was several months after.
Yeah.
When they went back, George Lutz would not go back into the house.
No, he refused.
He took them to the property and then stayed outside.
Yeah.
They then did their investigation and they did several attempts to contact someone. But the thing that seems to come out of this investigation and still stands up today, or comes up today, is a photograph.
Oh, it gives me chills.
I literally I actually have trouble looking at that photograph. It really makes the hair on my arm stand up.
So have you seen the comparison between the photograph of the little boy and the photograph of the youngest DeFeo son?
DeFeo, yeah.
Yeah, we have. What do you think? 'Cause I think it looks like the little boy.
It does. It really, because one of the debunk theories is actually it's one of the investigators on their knees. But it looks like a small boy.
I was going to say, I don't buy into that. The only, like you say, the only person they think it might have been was this young lad who was on the film crew, the Channel 5 film crew, I think, that was in there at the time. And he was wearing glasses, and that's why they think that you get this reflective eye that you can see in the picture. This boy's got like these glowing eyes. But it looks so not like a young man on his knee, a tall younger man on his knees wearing glasses. To me, it looks like a little kid peering through the banisters, so clearly.
This is it. So they claim, the debunkers. Some people have stated it was a guy called Paul Bartz, who was a young investigator on the team. But when he's been asked, he has sworn to high heaven that it's not him and that he was not actually in the house when those photographs were taken. Because those photographs were taken on a camera set on a timer. So, anyone can say that. But just looking at that photo, there's
just something about it, though, that just raises the hackles.
Exactly, yeah, I totally agree. The other thing that happened on that visit is actually one of the other guys, I think it's the photographer, Gene Campbell, when he was carrying his equipment up the stairs, he had palpitations. He had a strong chest pain, he had palpitations, and actually almost fell down the stairs and had to be carried or helped from the building. And apparently there was no report of health issues before or after. It was just a single isolated event within that investigation. So, do
you know what? I've heard that quite a lot, actually, from people that have gone into places with to investigate. And they've had a really, really strong fit. And sometimes it's nausea and dizziness and palpitations. It seems to be quite common.
And that's my point. It's not like a fantastical... No, he didn't turn purple. He didn't levitate. It's just something that actually gets reported again and again and again. Is a physical reaction to a location or to a presence.
Yeah.
So again, I think it starts to lend further credence to this actually having some legs.
This is the thing when you really dig down through all the, like you say, the superfluous bits of the story to the basic bits of the story. None of them seem outside the realms of possibility to us. Like I say, from our experiences, from experiencing a haunted house, from having, I've had those kind of reactions when I've gone into haunted buildings, with the feeling nauseous and palpitations and things like that. They all seem really, really plausible.
And it doesn't sound that scary when you sit and say, I heard some footsteps. And, sitting at home on your sofa, with the telly on, it doesn't sound scary at all. But when you live it, it's a lot more terrifying than you think it'll be.
because home is meant to be your safe place. And, everybody likes to have a good scare, go out to a haunted building and get spooked out and creeped out. But you know that you're going back to a safe environment. And when that safe environment becomes the place of fear for you, and like Fitz says, it doesn't sound very scary just hearing some doors banging and noises waking you up at the night. But when you've got no safe place to go to get away from that, that's terrifying. And it wouldn't take much to make you leave.
No, I agree. And I think that plays into it. I think that is underplayed in this, that, 28 days is actually, it's a short period of time in the grand scheme of things. But actually, if that's what you're suffering on a daily basis, and a big part of that is fear and tension and, like I say, some sort of psychological pressure, 28 days can be a very, very long time.
With that kind of level of activity, yeah, I mean, the house we lived in, there was one particular night I can think of where there was banging and crashing. There was nobody else in the house but us, but you could literally see the ceiling shake from the noise that was going on upstairs. It was like there was somebody throwing furniture around upstairs, and we just had to leave. You can't stay in that environment. You just can't.
No, I think that's it. I think once you sort of start to have that happen, and I will admit, I've never really experienced anything in a home I've been in that's been supernatural, but I've had loud neighbours. And it's the same thing. That
that is really bad though. It is unlivable sometimes.
Yeah, you can reach a breaking point where you're just like, I don't know what to do.
And add into that George and I think probably Danny and maybe even Chris as well had mental problems. Yeah. Then you can see how they'd snap with the constant, with having no safe place and no respite.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that came up again, and I would say it's a more modern accusation that appears to have been thrown into this, is that George Lutz was actually into the occult, and this actually may have been something. This may have been him provoking spirits that were in the building.
Yeah, now I don't know what to make of that. Like you say, that's only popped up in very recently, I think, really. This and to start with, there was just this claim that he'd been practicing, both of them actually, George and Kathy, had been practicing transcendental meditation. And then when Daniel Lutz did his My Amityville Horror, he said that even before they moved to Amityville, George had the, shelves of occult books, and Satanism books, and that he'd walked in on George actually levitating tools across the garage.
Yeah, that got a bit strange.
Yeah.
But he said it was one of the first things, wasn't it, that he had a bookcase full of,
occult books. But
now,
this has only come out now.
Yeah, that sort of really doesn't sort of stand up for me, especially because one of the first things they did in the house was get a priest in. And you'd have thought that the first thing a priest would have spotted was, why have you got pagan and occult books all over the place? Because he said, because Danny said they were out in plain view for everyone to see, masses and masses of books about, torture and the occult and various other things. And, if you're a priest and you're blessing the house, which means you're going into every single room, you're going to spot that, aren't you?
Yeah, if you've got some big old, the Black Bible as a coffee table book, I think he's going to notice it.
You'd think.
It was just a really bizarre. Like I say, it comes out of nowhere. I think it has come from that My Amityville documentary, and then seems to have grown legs. That it's now reported as almost as fact. That, oh yes, it's known that George Lutz was into the occult. But when you look back at the original stuff, him doing the transcendental meditation seems to be a known quantity and has never been denied.
No, but it was the 70s.
And that's what I say. But yeah, that was a thing in the 70s anyway. But I don't even think like occult books and books on spiritualism and lots of things would have been widely available in any real form. And this
I'm trying to think when did we have this? Because there was the Satanic Panic at one point, wasn't there? And there were like almost coffee table occult books that became very popular at one point, but I couldn't tell you exactly where. Which part of the decade that was in. It
is the sort of the late 70s, early 80s, especially in the UK. It sort of comes about.
Yeah.
And is a result of several things in the 70s.
But I think the point being there that those books were owned by a lot of people literally as coffee table books, not because they were seriously dabbling in the occult. It was the 70s equivalent of something going viral.
It is. I mean, it's a bit like there's a mystery I'm always fascinated by. It's the guy who died on a beach in Australia, and there was no identification was found on him at all, apart from a piece of paper that's it says Tamon Shud on it.
Oh yeah, I've heard about this.
I haven't.
The Summit,
Have you not?
The Summit Man. I forget, it's come out of nowhere. But basically, for years they were like, "Oh my god, this is code. It's got to be something." And then it turns out it's actually the last page of a book of poetry from a Middle Eastern prince. At the time, was pretty much the biggest seller.
Oh, I see.
So again, it's that thing like for years people thought, "Oh, these are fascinating words," and then when they find out that it's actually from this specific book, it's like, oh, the meaning of it sort of dies down. I mean, the
Completely different, yeah.
You put it in context. So it may have been that he had some books on meditation and and spirituality, probably.
Yeah.
But then to claim that they were occult books is probably a bit of a step up.
Well, you've got to remember that Danny was, what, 7 at the time?
I think
Yeah,
it was,
7 or 8 something.
Was he 10? Was he in his 10 when he moved into Amityville? I can't remember which way round it is.
Plus, again, like you say, this is a different time. I mean, kids are sort of acting like adults at 13 now, whereas when I was younger, we were still going up to the country park on our bikes at 13, and I'm sure back in the sort of 70s, early 80s, it would have been a little bit more innocent. So I think, maybe he perhaps saw, I don't know, Kama Sutra or something on the bookshelf and decided that was freaky. And that's the image he had, and he's sort of grown and built on that over time.
I agree. I think that's most likely the account is through resentment and bitterness of all those years. It's built up in his head as something completely different, and mental health has probably had some hand to play in that.
You have no idea where the telekinesis story comes from, though.
No, can't help you on that one.
So, really, based on what we've said, everything we've recovered and everything we've discussed, do you think then that the Amityville Horror has any sort of grounding in reality, any possibility of being a real ghost story?
I think so.
Absolutely, yeah, I do.
I think the story ran away before they had a chance to tell it themselves. But yeah, I think there was something there, and it scared them enough that they felt they had to get out of the house. And then the story ran away, and they, through whatever reason, whether it was pride or whether it was because of sensationalism, or even after the fact, thinking they might make some money off it, that they had to sort of comply a little bit with the story, that it's built up to something that was bigger than was originally there.
I think you're right. I think it's that case of once the horse had bolted, they couldn't get it back in the stable, so it was, you sort of had to just go with it and ride it.
Definitely, yeah. But all stemming, I think, from a seed of truth. Really, I do think there was something happening in that house. I think it may have been more of a poltergeist activity than any Indian burial ground.
Yeah. Oh, God,
but nevertheless...
The Stephen King ending, yeah.
Yeah.
If only there was something with The Shining there, they'd have probably been fine.
But that's really not to take away from the fact that, I think they had a genuine experience, and it would have been terrifying.
I agree. I think I would be fascinated as excuse the phrase, but to be a fly on the wall in that house.
No pun intended.
Yeah, for those 28 days to have really seen what they went through and to see what happened, because I do think there's a genuine thread, of truth and something in here that could be, paranormally sort of like fascinating, but has been lost in the blur of everything else.
Oh, I agree. Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's it, really. I think we've sort of nailed it.
We've sort of covered everything. We solved it. All these years, all it took was us three.
That's it. No, it is. It's been fascinating, this chat, because it's been one of those to say, as all the research I've done, everything is sort of, there's so much to consider, and so many people's views, and so many people's opinions that it's fascinating. There's so much more
The
could be said
plot
about
kept
it.
getting thicker and thicker.
Yeah, as more people want to get involved.
Yeah.
I mean, the big thing to say is a bit of a cap is that, they left the house January the 14th, 1976, and they sold the house eventually. And since then, there's been no further or no reported activity in the house.
Well, you say that, but just for one last tiny little rabbit hole, if at the end, I think it was the end of the first book, certainly in the second book, they did give account. The family gave accounts of the fact that the activity had followed them, and both sons, even now, say that the activity has followed them in adult life. They talk about being subjected to exorcisms as children. And basically that, the activity went with them. So when you think of it like that, well, you could either think of it like that, or you could think of it from the poltergeist activity point of view, where it's caused by one person. Then actually there'd be no reason for there to still be activity at 112 Ocean Avenue.
No, that's a good point. So, and if it was poltergeist activity, instead of a ghost, and it was focused on a person instead of a building, then yeah, would it have followed them? And
yeah, definitely. And it wouldn't still be in the house. Why would it?
And it all seems to be focused around the troubled families. Both the DeFeos and the Lutzes were not your typical family. And whether that's paranormal or psychosis, it's the fact that they're both sort of in that condition. You get a regular family move into the house after they've gone, they probably won't notice anything. Yeah, but whether it's...
I wonder if, because it seems like, say, it's gone through several owners in the last couple of decades, but there's not been the churn of that couple of years, that period of time. If you do have like a happy family move in there that then has a content life and normal, does that then quell some of that energy?
Absolutely. I mean, we've heard stories from so many people that, people that have been in really, really active houses, and they all say the same thing: it feeds off negative energy. And the more negativity you feed it, the worse it gets.
So that's it. So it may have been that I'd be interested to see if those families that were in the house following in the years following the events, that when they maybe had a row or there was an argument in the family, did something kick off? Did they have minor things
that perhaps just weren't very noticeable, or they just chose to ignore? And also there's the fact that the owners after the Lutzes didn't want anybody to think there was anything going on there. Even if there had been, I think they would have said there wasn't, because at this point you've got people, driving up to the house and pulling bits of the fence off so they can take souvenirs away with them, and mobbing their lawn and their property because the house is so famous now. So they're not going to want to turn around and say that the activity is still happening. They just want to be left alone.
That's another good point. I mean, it's that thing, because they actually renovated part of the house so that it doesn't look like...
they took out the windows.
Yeah, the famous sort of windows and stuff. They've taken out they've renovated to look different so that people almost drive past it.
Yeah, and I think they renumbered the street as well.
Yeah, because they were being, like I say, every Halloween they were being swamped by people coming to see the notorious Amityville house. So you have another good point of if you don't want that notoriety, you just want to get on, then you take away the spectacle.
Yeah. So,
I think that's it. I think we've covered all. I find that fascinating. It's been a really interesting talk about this because
it has.
I've really enjoyed getting into the whole idea of the Amityville thing, because 20th Century Geek is very much about the pop culture history of the 20th century, and this to me is a massive milestone in sort of in horror history.
Oh, huge.
Like I say, more so than in supernatural history, because it's so overtaken by entertainment. I mean, this film is so responsive. The film and subsequent rip-offs are so, responsible for everything we have today. Without the Amityville Horror, you wouldn't have Poltergeist. Without the Amityville Horror,
no,
you probably wouldn't have The Conjuring, and the
whole Warren franchise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the Warrens probably wouldn't have got as famous as they did, and
yeah. Oh, do you know what? I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, you could be right.
That's a very good point. I mean, yeah. So it's responsible for a lot. The legacy of the Amityville Horror is actually a lot wider than just this single family. It's a really interesting event. I mean, in the next show, I'm actually going to be looking at the films and how they've affected things. So I will be talking about like Poltergeist and all those films that came after it. Just as a sidebar, I do not recommend any of the Amityville Horrors beyond the first one because they are all roundly
dreadful,
terrible. Yeah.
No, I've the only other one I've seen apart from the original is the 2005 remake, which was terrible as well.
Was that the Ryan Reynolds?
That
one?
was the Ryan Reynolds one, yeah. And Jodie the pig was now a little girl, ghost girl, that was one of the murdered DeFeo family members. It was all very weird.
It became very Hollywood. It became very stripped down, didn't it? It was a bit. That's the thing we didn't actually mention was Jodie the pig. Actually,
yeah. What's going on with that?
That's an interesting point. That's where the demon. That's the demon apparently, wasn't it? That's the thing that, like, again, the Warrens focused in on this Jodie the pig as being the demon in the house, but they actually recounted seeing a pig in the window. With big.
They did. It's another one of those that I've flip-flopped on a bit.
Yeah, I'm not certain that was entirely the case because I thought that, and then because what I'd heard was that Danny and George were watching the garage door be flipped up and down, and that they saw the pig demon in the window. But we were watching an interview with George earlier, and he mentioned looking up and seeing a figure in the window. Didn't mention Danny, didn't mention the garage door, and he just saw something in the window and ran upstairs to look at it, and it didn't go any further. And the other stories around that is that there was a neighbourhood cat that had the same name, and when the daughter drew a picture of what this thing is supposed to be, it looks very much like a child's drawing of a cat.
Which really disappointed me because I remember reading the book, Jay Anson's book, when I was a teenager. And in the centrefold, there was a reproduction picture of this Jodie the Demon Pig. And I was terrified by it. It was terrifying to me. And to find out years later that was probably a picture of the neighbour's cat is quite a letdown.
I've actually got the picture in front of me now. I've got the book, actually. I've just flicked into the book. And it says Missy's picture of Jodie running through the snow, and it's clearly not a pig.
No, it's not.
So yeah, and there was a large fat cat that the neighbourhood kids had christened the pig because it was so big. So, but again, that's something where it seems to get mixed in because again, I think I may have seen the same interview where George actually refers to seeing a figure in the window with red eyes and then seeing other things around the house and never mentions Jodie the pig other than it was something that Missy spoke to.
Yeah.
So it's that thing of like there's a kernel of truth in there that then's been twisted into something else.
I think it's the Chinese whispers effect, that when the story was being told and recorded and that they've either misheard or decided that they can play on that and make it bigger, like the windows exploding when it was just shutting. They're just taking a nugget of something that sounds odd, and it might not have been in context. They might have said, "Oh, Jodie the pig, this," and they've gone, "Hang on a minute, what's that about? Where did this pig come from?" When in fact it's it's just the kid going, "Oh, look at Jodie the pig," and it's just the neighbour's cat.
Well, that's it. No one really knows what when Jay Anson sat down to re-listen to all those cassettes of the conversations they'd had. He, like you say, he's listened in on one thing and thought, "Oh, that's a nice. That sounds good. That would fit into the story. That can add to that. That can add to that." He's built a structure that fits into almost. It's almost the book is a 3-act structure. And as you know, life isn't a 3-act structure. So
no, like you said in the beginning, it is written like a novel. It's not written like a true recounting of events at all. No,
and that's where I think the real, so you've really got to start taking this with a pinch of salt. And I think people write it off because of that, and I think that's selling it short, really.
Yeah, I do.
Right, I think we're going to try and wrap it up there.
Before we go down any more rabbit holes.
There are so many of the rabbit holes.
There are.
To go down. But I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been fantastic. And,
It has.
I feel like I've settled on a bit of a conclusion that I'm quite
Excellent.
comfortable with.
Yeah.
So, before we go though, pimp your podcast.
Go Fitz.
What more is there to say? Well, it's the right time of year. You chose the perfect day for this, by the way, Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
But yes, as we're coming up to Halloween, we're going to be having some more spooky stories on the show. We are actually trying to get together with some of the people that we used to live with at the house that was particularly active to have a discussion about that for our Halloween episode. So that should be quite interesting.
Oh, that'd be
And we'll
fascinating.
probably be covering lots of the things that we've talked about as happened in the Amityville house.
If your interest is piqued by any of the things we've hinted at here, we should be covering it in much more detail.
Oh, fantastic. I will be listening, of course, because I find the show brilliant. I've already obviously provided a story for you guys, my time
You
at secondary
have.
school.
And I do believe that is going to be in our Halloween episode as well.
Oh, fantastic. I look forward to that.
So do we. It's a good one.
So I assume you're on all the other the podcasting platforms?
Yep, we are on pretty much everywhere, I think. We've recently got on Google Play now, so I think we're on almost everywhere. So Stitcher, Podbean, iTunes, obviously, Google Play. You should be able to find us. If not, just Google Knock Once for Yes. I think we come up as the first hit in Google now.
Yep. And you can direct download all of our episodes from www.knockoncevs.com.
Brilliant. Excellent. Thank you very much, guys. This has been a great chat, and I will be in contact in the future. I might see if there's any other supernatural events that I think tie into the pop culture that'd be worth discussing. Maybe even actually the
go for it.
Warrens might be.
Oh,
Yes.
the Warren rabbit hole.
Might be worth a chat. Yeah. But, thank you very much, guys, and I shall leave you to enjoy your Friday evenings.
I just moved in my new house today. Moving was hard, but I got squared away. Bells started ringing and chain read aloud. Knew I'd moved in a haunted house. Still I made up my mind to stay. Nothing was gonna drive me away.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, there we have it. A fantastic discussion all about the Amityville Horror with the great guys from Not Once for Yes. Please, I really do recommend you check out their podcast on all platforms. They are very, very interesting. And some of the stories that they've received have been chilling. Absolutely perfect for this time of year as the nights draw in. As I say, in the next episode, we're going to be looking at more about the Amityville Horror. But this time we're going to be looking at it from the entertainment perspective. We shall start with the first film and work our way through. And we're going to look at how that single film and this event changed the face of haunted house films for the rest of the 20th century. For now, you can always get in contact. Find us on Twitter at 20th Century Geek. We're on Facebook under 20th Century Geek. If you want to email me directly, it's 20thcenturygeek@gmail.com. I'm also on Tumblr. I'm on Instagram. Please check out the photos we've been doing on Instagram. It's at 20th Century Geek. And the biggie, please, if you are willing to give me some donations, 20th Century Geek is now on Patreon. Please check us out. Help us keep the lights on. Anyway, for now, thanks for listening, and we'll catch up again soon.